My name is Elaine and I'm 32 years old. I never thought my own sister would betray me so completely. Judith and I were supposed to be there for each other through everything. Instead, she not only cut me out of her wedding, but stole my identity and $100,000 from my accounts. I was devastated when I found out I was not invited, but I had no idea that was just the beginning. Before I tell you how my sister's perfect day turned into an FBI raid, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had family betray your trust. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, Judith and I shared everything, despite our 3-year age gap. Our childhood home was filled with laughter and secrets whispered under blanket forts late at night. Our parents, Beverly and Harold, provided a stable, middle-class life. Dad worked as an insurance agent, while Mum taught at the local elementary school. We were comfortable, but never extravagant. Elaine promised we will always be best friends, Judith would say, linking her pinky finger with mine when we were kids. I always promised, believing nothing could ever come between us. We had our typical sister moments, of course. Judith would borrow my favourite sweater without asking, and I would occasionally read her diary. But at the end of the day, we were each other's strongest supporters. When Judith struggled with math, I stayed up late helping her study. When I had stage fright before the school play, she rehearsed with me until I knew every line perfectly. "You are going to be amazing," she told me, backstage, squeezing my hand before I went on. And because she believed in me, I believed in myself too. Our teenage years brought new challenges, but our bond remained. Judith developed a talent for fashion design, constantly sketching outfits and transforming thrift store finds into runway-worthy pieces. I discovered my aptitude for numbers and finance, mapping out investment strategies before I even had money to invest. "When I have my fashion label, you will manage all my money," Judith would say, and we would dream about our future success together. After high school, we went our separate ways for college. I attended Boston University to study finance while Judith pursued fashion design in New York. The distance was difficult at first. We called each other daily, sharing stories about roommates, challenging professors, and romantic disasters. "I met this guy in my color theory class," Judith gushed during our weekly Sunday call in her junior year. "He says I have the best eye for complementary colors he has ever seen." I was genuinely happy for her, even as I pulled an all-nighter for my financial analysis midterm. That was our dynamic. She lived a vibrant, creative life while I focused on building security and stability. After graduation, I secured a position as a junior financial analyst at a respected firm in Boston. The hours were grueling, but the satisfaction of watching my bank account grow made it worthwhile. I lived frugally, bringing lunch from home and sharing an apartment with 2 roommates, all to save for my dream of owning a home someday. Judith struggled more after college. The fashion industry was competitive and unforgiving. She bounced between unpaid internships and retail jobs, occasionally selling custom pieces on the side. I supported her however I could, sending care packages and listening to her frustrations during our calls. "I just need one break," she would say, "one person to recognize my talent." The first changes in our relationship were subtle. Judith began calling less frequently, her social media filled with photos at exclusive restaurants and clubs I knew she could not afford on her assistant's salary at a small design studio. When I asked about it, her answers were vague. "I have connections now," she would say dismissively. "You would not understand the fashion world." Then came Richard. Judith met him at a gallery opening where she was helping her boss. He was handsome, charming, and supposedly worked in international business development, though the details were always fuzzy. "You have to meet him, Elaine. He is absolutely perfect," Judith bubbled over the phone. 6 months later, during a rare weekend when Judith visited Boston, I finally met the man who had captured my sister's heart. Richard arrived in a luxury car, dressed impeccably in what I later learned was a $3,000 suit. He was polite but distant, asking few questions about my life while talking extensively about their recent trip to Monaco. "How can you afford all this travelling?" I asked when Richard stepped away to take a call. Judith's expression hardened slightly. "Richard is very successful, and he believes in enjoying life now, not hoarding money for some future that might never come." The comment stung. I had just proudly shared that my savings had reached $100,000 after 5 years of disciplined saving and careful investing. It was not hoarding to me. It represented security, independence, and my future home. As the months passed, Judith transformed. The sister who once wore creative thrift store outfits now only discussed designer labels. Her Instagram showcased a lifestyle of luxury that seemed impossible on her salary. When I expressed concern, she grew defensive. "Maybe if you were not so boring with your spreadsheets and retirement accounts, you would understand that connections and appearances matter in my world," she snapped during one tense phone call. Despite the growing distance, I remained supportive. When Judith texted that Richard had proposed with a massive diamond ring in Santorini, I sent champagne to her apartment and asked when I could help plan the wedding. "We are thinking about a small ceremony," she replied. "Nothing extravagant." I should have recognized the red flags. The sister who had dreamed of designing her own wedding dress and having a fairy tale celebration since childhood was suddenly planning something small. The brother-in-law-to-be who flaunted wealth at every opportunity would settle for anything less than spectacular. Something did not add up, but I was still too trusting to see it. Little did I know that while I was calculating interest rates and managing portfolios at work, my sister and her fiancé were calculating something far more sinister, a betrayal that would destroy not just our relationship, but nearly my entire financial future. The first blow came on a Tuesday evening in March. I had just finished a grueling day at work, presenting investment strategies to a particularly demanding client. My phone rang as I unlocked my apartment door, and seeing Judith's name brought a smile to my face. "Hey, I was just thinking about you," I said, dropping my keys on the counter. "I wanted to let you know we have set a date," Judith announced, her voice bubbling with excitement. "August 12th at a beautiful venue in the Hamptons." "That is fantastic," I replied, genuinely happy for her. "So I should request that Friday off too for the rehearsal dinner, right? And do you have a colour scheme in mind for the bridesmaids' dresses?" I was thinking maybe I should start looking at styles that would complement the other bridesmaids, but still make me stand out a little as maid of honour. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. "Actually, Elaine," Judith finally said, her voice cooler now, "we are keeping the wedding party small, really intimate." My stomach dropped. "Oh, I just assumed. We always said we would be each other's maid of honour. That was when we were kids," Judith replied dismissively. "Richard and I want to keep things elegant and simple. His best friend's wife is helping me coordinate everything." I sat down heavily on my couch, trying to process what I was hearing. "So, you do not want me as your maid of honour. It is not personal," she said, though everything about this felt intensely personal. "We are just having a couple of close friends stand with us." I swallowed hard. "Well, I would love to help in any other way. Maybe I could do a reading or help with the guest book." Another pause. "We have already assigned those roles, but you will get your invitation soon, and we would love to have you there as a guest." As a guest. After 30 years of being sisters, after all our promises and shared dreams, I had been demoted to just another guest at my only sister's wedding. "I have to go," Judith said before I could respond. "Richard is taking me to dinner to meet some important business associates. Talk soon." The call ended, leaving me stunned and hurt. I tried telling myself not to overreact. Perhaps Judith was just overwhelmed with wedding planning and would come around. Maybe Richard's family had certain expectations she was trying to accommodate. 2 days later, my confusion turned to shock when I was scrolling through Instagram and saw a post from Judith's friend Pamela. So honoured to be one of 12 bridesmaids for at Judith Designs Summer Wedding Extravaganza. Bridesmaids, goals, summer wedding, 12 bridesmaids, 12. And her own sister was not one of them. I called my mother immediately. Mum, did you know Judith has 12 bridesmaids in her wedding, and I am not one of them? Beverly sighed. Honey, you know how Judith gets caught up in these social circles now. Those are all fashion industry connections and Richard's family friends. But I am her sister, I protested, hating how my voice cracked. It is just a small ceremony in terms of who is actually participating, Mum replied, echoing Judith's bizarre logic. Try not to take it personally. Small. They kept using that word while planning what was clearly becoming an extravagant affair. The next week, Mum casually mentioned the venue cost $60,000 for the weekend, the week after she let slip that Judith had commissioned a well-known designer to create her gown. None of this sounded small to me, and it certainly did not sound like something Judith and Richard could afford, based on what I knew of their finances. Still hoping to salvage our relationship, I texted Judith offering to help address invitations or assemble welcome bags for out-of-town guests. We have hired people for that, came her curt reply. Professional touch. When I finally received my invitation, it was addressed only to me without a +1. Despite the fact I had been dating someone for several months. The invitation itself was elaborate, with gold foil lettering and a custom watercolour of the Hamptons venue. The estimated cost per invitation alone made my financial analyst brain spin. In a last-ditch effort, I drove to New York one weekend to take Judith to lunch. She reluctantly agreed, but when I arrived at the trendy restaurant she had selected, Richard was unexpectedly there too. I thought it would be nice for the three of us to catch up, Judith said, though her eyes would not quite meet mine. Throughout lunch, they discussed the wedding in vague terms, changing the subject whenever I asked specific questions. Richard dominated the conversation with stories about celebrities they had met and exclusive parties they had attended. The wedding is going to be the social event of the season, he boasted. We have a few surprise guests coming that would blow your mind. When the check came, Richard made a show of paying with a black credit card, winking at me as he did so. Perks of the business, right? On my drive back to Boston, I called Mum again. Has Judith ever actually explained what Richard does for work? I asked. Something in international finance, Mum replied vaguely. He travels a lot. Very successful. As a financial professional, those generalities raised red flags for me. International finance was my world, and Richard had never once engaged with me about it in any substantive way. 2 weeks before the wedding, the final blow came via text message from Judith. Richard and I have been talking, and we think it is best if you do not attend the wedding. Your negativity about our relationship has been noticed by several people, and I cannot have that energy on my special day. I will have the hotel cancel your room reservation. I stared at the message in disbelief, tears streaming down my face. Negativity. I had bent over backwards, trying to be supportive, despite being increasingly shut out. I tried calling, but she did not answer. I texted our parents, who responded with vague platitudes about giving Judith space and respecting her wishes on her special day. They were still planning to attend. That night, I cried myself to sleep, mourning not just my exclusion from the wedding, but what felt like the death of my relationship with my sister. Little did I know that her betrayal went far deeper than I could have imagined, and that the universe had a strange way of delivering justice when it was least expected. It was exactly 26 days before Judith's wedding when I discovered the first suspicious transaction. I have always been meticulous about my finances, checking my accounts every Sunday evening to update my budget spreadsheet. Some might call it obsessive, but this habit would ultimately be my salvation. That is strange, I muttered to myself, staring at my laptop screen. There was a charge for $312 at a high-end department store in Manhattan that I definitely had not made. I had not even been to New York in over a month. I immediately called the bank's fraud department. "We can dispute this charge, Ms. Thompson," the representative named Gloria said. "But I am also seeing several other transactions from New York retailers over the past few weeks. Would you like me to send you a complete list?" My stomach tightened as Gloria emailed me a detailed statement. In addition to the charge I had spotted, there were 11 other purchases I had not made, totaling nearly $4,000. All from luxury retailers, all in New York. "I will need to cancel your card immediately and issue a new one," Gloria explained. "We will investigate these transactions and credit your account while the investigation is ongoing." That should have been the end of it. A simple case of credit card fraud, annoying but fixable. But something prompted me to dig deeper. I pulled my credit report, something I do annually, but had not checked in several months. What I found made my blood run cold. There were 6 credit inquiries I had not authorized, 2 new credit cards had been opened in my name, and most alarmingly, there was a personal loan for $45,000 that I absolutely had not taken out. "This cannot be happening," I whispered to my empty apartment. I spent the entire night documenting everything, taking screenshots, making notes of dates and amounts. The unauthorized activity had begun approximately 8 months earlier, around the time Judith had gotten engaged to Richard. It started small, a few $100s here and there, but had escalated dramatically in the months leading up to the wedding. The next morning, I called in sick to work and made appointments with my bank, the credit bureaus, and the local police department. At each stop, I provided my meticulously organized evidence and filed the necessary reports. "This is unfortunately very common," the police officer told me as he took my statement. "But the unusual thing in your case is the pattern. This does not look like random identity theft. The perpetrator seems to know your information very well and has been careful to stay just under the radar." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, they did not max out your credit cards immediately or take out the largest possible loan. They have been building up slowly, making minimum payments to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. That suggests someone who either knows you personally or has access to a significant amount of your personal information." A chill ran through me as his words sank in. This was not some anonymous hacker or data breach. This was targeted and personal. That evening, I created a timeline of all the fraudulent activity. The first unauthorized charge occurred 1 week after I had visited Judith and Richard in New York, bringing with me a box of old family photos I thought Judith might want for wedding planning. In that box were also report cards, certificates, and other documents from our childhood home that our parents had asked me to give her when they downsized. Documents that contained my social security number, my mother's maiden name, and answers to many common security questions. I felt physically ill as the realization dawned on me. Could my own sister be stealing from me? It seemed unthinkable, and yet the evidence was pointing in a disturbing direction. With shaking hands, I sent Judith a carefully worded text. "Need to talk to you about some unusual activity on my accounts. Someone has been using my identity to open credit cards and loans. The bank is investigating, and I am trying to figure out if any family documents might have been compromised. Do you still have that box of stuff I brought you last fall?" Her response came almost immediately. "I have no idea what you are talking about. I am busy with wedding planning. Stop trying to make everything about you." The defensiveness in her message, when I had not accused her of anything, spoke volumes. I decided to test my theory further. I called my mother and casually mentioned the identity theft situation, asking if she or Dad had perhaps used my old address accidentally for something. "Oh, honey, that is terrible," Mum said, sounding genuinely concerned. "But I am sure it is just some random criminal. These things happen all the time." "The thing is," I said carefully, "the detective mentioned that the transactions are all in New York. and they started right after I visited Judith last fall. There was a long pause before my mother spoke again, her voice noticeably cooler. Are you suggesting your sister would steal from you? That is ridiculous, Elaine. She is about to have a beautiful wedding and start her life with Richard. Why would she risk everything to steal your identity? I did not say it was Judith, I replied, though that was exactly what I suspected. I am just trying to figure out when my information might have been compromised. Well, I think you should be very careful about making accusations, Mum said firmly. This is a special time for your sister, and dragging her into your financial problems would be very selfish. My financial problems. As if I had somehow invited this identity theft upon myself. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. Not only was my sister potentially stealing from me, but my parents seemed ready to defend her, regardless of evidence. The next day, I received a call from a credit card company about a suspicious application attempt. Someone had tried to open a new premium card with a $30,000 limit in my name, but had been flagged due to the fraud alerts I had placed on my credit. Can you tell me what address was used on the application? I asked the security representative. When he read me the address, my suspicions were confirmed. It was Judith and Richard's apartment in Manhattan. With this new piece of evidence, I returned to the police station and requested to speak with a detective who specialized in financial crimes. Detective Vernon Miller listened carefully to my story and reviewed my documentation. Based on what you have shown me, we have enough to subpoena IP address records from the financial institutions, he explained. If these applications and accounts were accessed from your sister's home or devices, we will know soon enough. What happens then? I asked, both dreading and needing the answer. Identity theft is a serious crime, Ms. Thompson. If your sister and her fiancé are responsible, they could face significant jail time, especially given the amount involved. I left the police station with a heavy heart. The investigation was officially out of my hands. All I could do now was wait and continue to document any new fraudulent activity while working with the banks to secure my accounts. 3 days later, I received another devastating blow. The loan company provided records showing that the $45,000 personal loan taken out in my name had been disbursed to a wedding planning company in the Hamptons, the same company handling Judith's wedding. The pieces were all falling into place, painting a picture too painful to fully comprehend. My sister and her fiancé had not only excluded me from their wedding, they were financing it by stealing my identity and draining my life savings. The evidence kept mounting like a slow-motion train wreck I could not look away from. Detective Miller called me into the station 1 week after I had filed my report. We have received the subpoenaed records, he said gravely as I sat across from him. I am afraid the news is not good. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printouts showing IP addresses, timestamps, and location data. All the fraudulent accounts and transactions had been accessed from either Judith and Richard's apartment or from their mobile devices. There is more, Detective Miller continued. We ran a background check on Richard Norton and discovered he has a history of financial fraud. He served 14 months in California for a similar scheme 5 years ago. I felt the blood drain from my face. My sister is marrying a convicted fraudster. It appears so, and based on our investigation, they have been working together on this current fraud. Your sister's design experience would explain the high-quality forged documents used to open these accounts. The detective explained that given the interstate nature of the crimes and the significant amount stolen, the FBI had been brought into the case. Agent Leonard Wilson would be contacting me to take over the investigation. Sure enough, Agent Wilson called that afternoon. His deep, authoritative voice somehow made the situation feel both more serious and more manageable simultaneously. Ms. Thompson, we believe your sister and her fiancé have victimized at least 3 other individuals besides yourself, he explained. The total fraud exceeds $200,000, with you being the primary victim. Other victims, I echoed, trying to process this new information. Yes, 2 former colleagues of your sister's and 1 elderly relative of Mr. Norton's. We have been building a case for several weeks, and your report provided the final pieces we needed. Agent Wilson asked me to come to the FBI field office the following day to provide a formal statement. When I arrived, I was ushered into a conference room where 2 other agents were already waiting with Agent Wilson. We understand this is difficult, Agent Wilson said kindly as I sat down, but your cooperation is crucial to stopping these crimes and potentially helping your sister before she gets in even deeper. For the next 3 hours, I went through everything chronologically, from the moment Judith met Richard to the discovery of the fraud. The agents took detailed notes and recorded my statement. Based on the evidence we have gathered, we will be obtaining arrest warrants for both Judith Thompson and Richard Norton, Agent Wilson explained when we had finished. However, we have reason to believe they may be planning to leave the country after their wedding. Multiple one-way tickets to countries without extradition treaties have been purchased in different names but linked to their payment methods. They are going to run, I whispered, the reality of the situation hitting me anew. We believe so, which is why we need to act before the wedding. I looked up sharply. Before, you mean you are going to arrest them before the wedding day? Agent Wilson exchanged glances with his colleagues. We were planning to execute the warrants at the rehearsal dinner. It would give us the best opportunity to apprehend them both in a controlled environment. Something in me rebelled at the thought. Despite everything Judith had done, the image of her being handcuffed in her rehearsal dinner dress in front of our family was too painful to contemplate. Is there any other option? I asked. Could you wait until after the ceremony at least? The agents conferred quietly before Agent Wilson responded. Given their flight risk, we cannot wait until after the honeymoon, but we could potentially delay until after the ceremony itself. The reception would actually provide good operational cover for our team. I nodded gratefully. At least Judith would have her moment at the altar, even if everything would come crashing down afterward. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived in a strange limbo. I continued working and going through the motions of normal life, while knowing that a federal investigation was closing in on my sister. I had not spoken to Judith or my parents since being uninvited from the wedding. The distance was painful, but also provided some protection from having to lie about what I knew. 3 days before the wedding, Agent Wilson called with an update. We have finalized our operational plan, he explained. We will have agents positioned around the venue with a main team ready to move in during the reception. We will be as discreet as possible given the circumstances. Thank you, I said quietly. I appreciate your consideration. There is one more thing, Ms. Thompson. We would like you to be available by phone during the operation in case we need any family information or assistance identifying certain guests. I agreed, though the thought of being on standby during what should have been my sister's happiest day turned my stomach. I arranged to take the day off work and prepared to spend the wedding day alone in my apartment, waiting for the call that would signal the end of my sister's freedom. The night before the wedding, I could not sleep. I paced my apartment, checking my phone obsessively, though I knew nothing would happen until the following afternoon. Around midnight, I received a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of Judith at her rehearsal dinner, smiling broadly, with our parents on either side of her. No message accompanied the image. I stared at the photo, tears streaming down my face. Despite everything, a part of me still loved my sister and mourned what could have been. The 3 of us looked so happy, so normal, completely unaware of what was coming. In that moment, I almost called Agent Wilson to beg him to call off the operation. But then I remembered the $45,000 taken from my account to pay for that very rehearsal dinner. The money I had saved for years working overtime and sacrificing vacations while Judith and Richard lived lavishly at my expense. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect August day for a Hamptons wedding. I made coffee and set up my laptop on the kitchen table, creating a command center of sorts for what I knew would be a long and emotionally draining day. At noon, Agent Wilson sent a text. Team in position. Ceremony scheduled for 2 p.m. I acknowledged his message and then sat in the silence of my apartment, imagining the scene unfolding 150 miles away. Judith would be getting her hair and makeup done now, probably surrounded by her 12 bridesmaids. Mum would be fussing over details, and Dad would be practicing his walk down the aisle. And I, her only sister, was sitting alone in Boston waiting for federal agents to arrest her. At 1:30, my phone rang. It was Agent Wilson. "There has been a complication," he said without preamble. "We have received intelligence that suggests Norton may have liquid assets we were unaware of hidden at the venue. We need to move before they can access these funds." "What does that mean?" I asked, my heart racing. "It means we cannot wait for the reception. We need to move during the ceremony." "But you promised," I protested. "I am sorry, Ms. Thompson. This is not my decision. The order comes from above." He hung up, leaving me stunned. I tried calling back, but got no answer. For the next 30 minutes, I called repeatedly, desperate to reach someone who could stop what was about to happen. At exactly 2:15, my phone lit up with a flurry of texts from unknown numbers, presumably wedding guests I knew. The messages were chaotic and confused. "OMG, why are there FBI agents here? What is happening? Men in suits just interrupted the ceremony. They are arresting Richard at the altar. Judith is screaming your name. What did you do?" Then came the most surreal text of all from my mother. "How could you do this to your sister? 39 calls from FBI during vows. Her day is ruined. 39 calls. I would later learn that the FBI had been trying to reach the venue manager to arrange a more discreet intervention, but when they could not get through, they continued calling repeatedly throughout the ceremony, creating a disruption that eventually led to the manager stepping into the ceremony to answer the insistent phone. By the time he returned with federal agents in tow, Judith and Richard were exchanging their vows. The timing could not have been worse, or perhaps in terms of dramatic justice, it could not have been more fitting. I sat frozen, watching the chaos unfold through the stream of texts flooding my phone. Within minutes, social media exploded with posts about the FBI wedding raid. Nancy, the wedding planner, apparently live-tweeted the entire arrest complete, with photos of Richard being handcuffed while still wearing his boutonniere. "Your sister keeps screaming that this is all your fault," another text informed me. "She says you framed them because you were jealous." I turned off my phone, unable to bear any more. In the silence of my apartment, I finally allowed myself to break down completely, mourning not just the day's events, but the sister I had lost long before any arrest warrants were issued. The days following the wedding day arrest were a blur of media attention, legal proceedings, and family chaos. I had not anticipated how quickly the story would spread, or how much public interest it would generate. FBI bride became a trending topic, with countless memes and jokes circulating online. For me, there was nothing funny about watching my family fall apart in the public eye. My phone rang at 7 the morning after the arrests. It was my father, his voice ragged with exhaustion and shock. "Elaine, we need to talk about what happened," he said without greeting. "Dad, How could you involve the FBI without even telling us?" he interrupted. "Do you have any idea what your mother and I went through yesterday, being questioned by agents in front of all our friends and family?" I took a deep breath. "Did they explain to you why Judith and Richard were arrested?" "Something about identity theft, but that has to be a mistake. Your sister would never steal from anyone, especially not you." "Dad, They stole almost $100,000 from me, I said, as gently as I could. They used my identity to finance their entire wedding. I have all the documentation. The FBI has even more evidence. There was a long silence before my father spoke again, his voice smaller now. That cannot be true. There must be some explanation. The explanation is that Richard is a convicted fraudster who got Judith involved in his schemes. I was not the only victim, just the main one. Another long pause. We need to get her a good lawyer. That was the moment I realized my parents were still more concerned about protecting Judith than acknowledging what she had done to me. It was a painful revelation, but one that helped me set necessary boundaries in the months that followed. Judith and Richard were held without bail due to the flight risk they presented. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks after their arrest, and I was asked to testify about the financial impact of their crimes. Walking into the courtroom that day was one of the hardest things I have ever done. Judith sat at the defendant's table in a plain navy dress, a stark contrast to the designer wedding gown she never got to wear for more than half a ceremony. She did not look at me as I took the stand. "Ms. Thompson," the prosecutor began, "could you please explain to the court how you discovered the identity theft perpetrated by the defendants?" For the next 20 minutes, I detailed the fraudulent accounts, the unauthorized charges, and the devastating impact on my financial security. Throughout my testimony, I felt Judith's eyes on me, but I could not bring myself to meet her gaze. When I finished speaking, the judge called a brief recess. As I left the witness stand, Judith finally spoke directly to me. "I hope you are happy now," she hissed as I passed the defense table. "You have ruined my life because you could not stand to see me happy." Her words cut deep, but they also confirmed what I had suspected all along. In Judith's mind, this was still somehow about me being jealous of her, not about her stealing my identity and nearly $100,000. The evidence against Judith and Richard was overwhelming. In addition to my testimony, the prosecution presented digital forensics linking the fraudulent accounts to their devices, surveillance footage of Judith using counterfeit identification at banks, and Richard's prior conviction for similar crimes. 2 months after their arrest, both accepted plea deals. Richard, with his prior record, received 8 years in federal prison. Judith, positioned by her attorney as being under Richard's influence, received 3 years plus 5 years of supervised release. The plea agreement included restitution requirements, but I knew I would likely never recover the full amount stolen. More painful than the financial loss was the family fracture that seemed beyond repair. My parents initially blamed me for Judith's imprisonment. They declined my invitation for Thanksgiving and spent Christmas visiting her in federal prison instead of accepting my offer to fly them to Boston. "Your sister made a mistake, but she is still family," my mother said during one tense phone call. "You chose to involve the authorities instead of handling it privately." "Stealing $100,000 is not a mistake, Mum," I replied. "It is a series of deliberate criminal actions taken over months." Slowly, as the shock wore off and they had time to process everything, my parents began to acknowledge the gravity of what Judith had done. 6 months after her sentencing, they finally agreed to meet with me and a family therapist to begin rebuilding our relationship. Dr. Margaret, our therapist, specialized in family trauma and betrayal. In our first session, she created a safe space for me to express the full impact of Judith's actions on my life. I lost my sister, my savings, and my sense of security all at once. I explained, tears flowing freely. And then I lost my parents too, at least temporarily, because they could not accept what had happened. My father reached for my hand, his own eyes moist. "We failed you, Elaine. We were so caught up in protecting Judith that we did not protect you. I am so sorry." That apology marked the beginning of our healing process. Over the next year, we attended monthly therapy sessions, gradually rebuilding trust and establishing healthier family dynamics. As for my financial recovery, it was a long and challenging road. The identity theft had damaged my credit score significantly, requiring countless hours of paperwork and phone calls to repair. Through the court's restitution order, I eventually recovered about $40,000, less than half of what was stolen. But something unexpected emerged from the ashes of this experience. My meticulous documentation of the fraud and my persistence in working with authorities caught the attention of my firm's security department. 6 months after the arrests, I was offered a position specializing in fraud detection and prevention, a role that came with a substantial salary increase and new professional opportunities. Your personal experience gives you insights that cannot be taught, my new manager explained, and your attention to detail throughout this ordeal demonstrated exactly the skills we need in this department. I also found unexpected support from Carolyn, a colleague who had experienced family betrayal of her own. She became not just a friend, but a lifeline during my darkest moments, offering perspective and understanding when my own family could not. Family is supposed to be your safety net, she told me over coffee one Sunday afternoon. When they are the ones who hurt you, it shakes your entire foundation. But you can build a new foundation, one that is actually stronger because you choose who belongs there. Those words resonated deeply with me. Over time, I built a chosen family of loyal friends who supported me unconditionally, something I had never experienced with Judith. 1 year after the wedding day arrests, I received my first letter from Judith. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope and sat with it unopened for 3 days, unsure if I was ready to read her words. When I finally opened it, I found not an apology, but a request for financial support for her commissary account. I did not respond. 3 months later, a second letter arrived. This one contained the beginnings of accountability, acknowledging that she had made poor choices, though still largely blaming Richard's influence for her actions. I wrote back a brief, factual letter, explaining the impact her actions had on my life and stating clearly that any future relationship would require genuine remorse and changed behavior, not just words on paper. Our correspondence continued sporadically, evolving slowly from stilted exchanges to more meaningful communication. By the time Judith had served half her sentence, she had begun to show real insight into her actions and their consequences. "I convinced myself that you would never miss the money," she wrote in one letter that particularly affected me. "You were always so good with finances, so responsible while I struggled. It started with just a little, and then it became easier each time. I told myself you owed me because you had it so easy. Now I see how warped my thinking was. You worked hard for everything you had, and I chose to take rather than do the same." Those words marked a turning point in my healing journey. They did not erase the pain or fully restore my trust, but they offered a glimmer of hope that someday, perhaps some form of sister relationship might be possible again. Today, 2 years after the FBI wedding, as it became known online, I am in a much different place. My career has flourished in unexpected ways, with the fraud prevention program I developed being implemented across our firm's national branches. My credit has been fully restored, and I have even managed to rebuild my savings to purchase my first condo. My relationship with my parents has healed significantly through our continued therapy and their eventual full acknowledgement of both Judith's actions and their initial enabling response. We spend holidays together now, and I can feel the genuine love and respect that was missing in those first painful months. As for Judith, she will be released next year. We have discussed the possibility of her entering a halfway house program in Boston rather than returning to New York, which would allow me to be part of her rehabilitation process if I choose to be. I am still undecided about how involved I want to be taking things one day at a time. What I know with certainty is that the experience, while traumatic, ultimately freed me from toxic family dynamics I had accepted as normal for far too long. The wedding I was not good enough to attend became the day that set me free from unhealthy obligations and false loyalty. I have learned that true family, whether blood-related or chosen, never asks you to compromise your worth or sacrifice your well-being for their benefit. Real love builds up rather than tears down. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for those who have harmed you, is to hold them accountable for their actions. If you have ever experienced betrayal by someone you trusted completely, I hope my story helps you feel less alone. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? Let me know in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and recovery. Thank you for listening, and remember that your worth is never determined by how others treat you, only by how you choose to rise after falling.